Good morning, y'all. This is Brown at I have Brown, and today we are going to be talking about Elvis, the 1979 TV movie starring Kurt Russell as Elvis Presley and directed by John Carpenter. This was the fourth film to be directed by John Carpenter, and it was the first time that he and Kurt Russell would work together. And following this movie, they would collaborate in four other films, those being Escape from New York, The Thing, Big Trouble in Little China, and Escape from LA. Seeing as how those movies fell within the realms of science fiction, horror, and fantasy, it's fascinating that Russell and Carpenter's working relationship began with a movie that was nowhere within those genres, but was rather a straight up biopic. And it was definitely a movie that fell into a formative period of time for both John Carpenter as a director and Kurt Russell as an actor, because at this point, John Carpenter had done the sci-fi stoner comedy Dark Star, the action thriller Assault on Precinct 13, and the horror movie Halloween. And ironically, it was that third film that one, put his name on the map, and two, was one of the factors that led to him getting the gig to direct Elvis. And the reasoning was supposedly that if this hotshot director can create an iconic film score with Halloween, then maybe he can direct a movie about an iconic musician. Now, I'm fairly certain there was more to it than that, but that's one of the stories that gets floated around a lot as far as how John Carpenter got the gig to direct Elvis. But for Kurt Russell, this was a point in time where he was basically trying to break away from the image of himself as that of as a former child star from Disney movies, and it wasn't really until his and John Carpenter's second collaboration together, Escape from New York, where Kurt Russell basically succeeded in that. But he definitely started it here, I think, with Elvis, because he gave a rather mature, nuanced performance. But yeah, it's an interesting. It's interesting that this movie fell within that rather formative period of time for both a director and an actor, because it definitely showed that John Carpenter could do stuff other than, or let me phrase that, it was at a point in time where John Carpenter wasn't doing just horror movies, or wasn't primarily known for horror movies, even though Halloween was arguably his most famous film up to this point. And it was shortly after that he also did the films The Fog and The Thing, and so I mean those definitely solidified his place within the horror genre. But he also was showing that, hey, I don't just do horror, I do other stuff, and with Kurt Russell, of course, I mean it definitely while he didn't quite, I guess, break away from how he was mainly recognized by audiences at this point, it definitely showed that he could give a good performance in a serious role, or a serious lead role, if you will. The first time I ever saw anything of this movie was when I was a little kid, and my dad and I were over at my grandma's place, and the three of us were watching it, and it was on cable TV. And I don't remember if my grandma had seen it already, but she was watching it with us, and my dad was saying, "Hey, Brown, you remember him from Stargate?" And he's pointing at Elvis Presley on the TV. And I'm like, "Really?" And he's like, "Yeah, I remember Colonel Jack O'Neill." And I'm like, "Wait, that's the same guy?" And I was like, "Wow," because my dad, stepmom, and I had seen the movie Stargate in the theater, and that was a pretty cool movie. Made an impression on me. It was also the first time I ever saw Kurt Russell or James Spader in anything. And so when Dad's telling me that that's the same guy who played Colonel Jack O'Neill, it's the same one who was playing Elvis Presley, I'm like, "Oh wow, cool," But we didn't stay for the whole thing because I think Dad and I had to go somewhere soon, eventually. But I liked what I saw, though, and I was always curious how the movie, how the whole movie was, But it wasn't until recently that I was able to, finally sit down and watch the whole thing, courtesy of having, gotten the DVD. Excuse me. But I gotta say, it's actually a pretty good movie. I just to give you all a heads up, I don't know a whole lot about the history of Elvis. So this particular movie was kind of the first time I saw something encapsulating Elvis's life. So I haven't read any books about the guy. I haven't really watched any documentaries about the guy. I mean, I know a couple stories about the guy, and I love his voice, but I wouldn't be able to say, oh, this part's accurate in this movie, that part's not accurate, and so on and so forth. Because I mean, like the movie Bohemian Rhapsody, the Freddie Mercury biopic. Prior to watching that movie, I'd seen two documentaries. One was just about Freddie Mercury, but the other one was about Freddie Mercury and the DJ Kenny Everett. And those particular documentaries were very informative, and I felt like, I was like, wow, I know a lot about Freddie Mercury here. And so when I watched Bohemian Rhapsody, I mean, I liked the movie, and Rami Malek did a fantastic job. And of course, the rest of the actors who played the Queen band, or the band Queen, did a great job as well. And of course, that Live Aid reenactment was worth the price of admission alone. But thing is, I was watching that movie, and while I did enjoy it, I was at the same time like, they got so much wrong with that movie. I mean, and I wouldn't have been able to, have said that in confidence had I not watched those documentaries. So, but unlike, with Bohemian Rhapsody, I was basically watching, Elvis here, with a fresh set of eyes, and an unbiased view as well. So, like I said, I wouldn't be able to say, oh, that's accurate, that's not accurate. But, I mean, that being said, I thought they did a pretty good job. I mean, considering that this was a TV movie from the 70s. But, excuse me. So, having said that, the movie, it starts off in 1969 where Elvis is performing in Vegas, or he's about to perform in Vegas, and it's his first live concert in 8 years. And he's at a point where, I mean, there's a lot of psychological baggage, both with his personal life and his professional life, and like he's concerned, whether or not he can still, maintain the role as the king, and if he's concerned about his relevance. I mean, does the public still know him and love him and all that stuff. But he's also it's under a lot of stress, because of how much of a toll that this fame has taken on his personal life, with his family and what have you. But as he's waiting for the concert to start, he kind of flashes back on his life, and it starts off. I mean, once the flashback begins, I mean, it starts off in 1945. You see him as a little kid, and it's in a rural Mississippi, and you see him and his family, and you find out that he had a stillborn brother named Jesse that he would kind of talk to, kind of like like almost like an imaginary friend, except he would act like he would talk to Jesse like he was really there. So you see how he started off in kind of poverty, with his mom and his dad, and then it flashes forward to the 1950s, and that's where Kurt Russell comes in, to play him, starting out from him as a teenager, and amongst other things, you see him make friends with a guy named Red West, who according to the movie, was someone who kind of stood up for Elvis when he was being bullied by some people, because Elvis was trying to have this sort of rock and roll look, or trying to create a rock and roll look, because he was wanting to be a musician, and of course this was a no for I guess the popular crowd and what have you, and so he was bullied a lot, or I don't know if he was bullied a lot, but he was bullied some. But this guy Red West took up for him, and the two became best friends. Um, and from then on, you basically see Elvis. He tries out at this talent show, and his then girlfriend, a girl named Bonnie, is one of the people who was like, hey, try this out. You got a gift and what have you. And so, and the crowd loves it. And he actually wins a prize and what have you. And then going forward, it shows him getting a record deal with a studio under a guy named Sam Phillips, played by Charles Cyphers. And the two of them have a pretty good working relationship with one another. And Elvis's songs, they start to get a lot of airplay. And his mom and his dad, I mean, they're really supportive of him. But there's the stress of poverty, which is something that's always dogged them. But then Elvis ends up making the acquaintance of a guy named Colonel Tom Parker, played by Pat Hingle, who ends up becoming Elvis's manager for the rest of his career. And Elvis, and at first he's reluctant to, he wants to take a shot at becoming a big time star, but at the same time he doesn't want to be disloyal to his friend and colleague Sam Phillips, the one at the record studio. But Sam basically says, hey, it's okay, I get it, you have a shot here, go for it. And so after that, Elvis and his entourage, Elvis and his band, they are managed by Colonel Tom Parker. And so Elvis basically becomes an icon. And he's got all this fame, money, luxury, and what have you. And after his girlfriend Bonnie had broken up with him, basically he wasn't in a really good place mentally. Even though he had all this fame and everything. But he meets this girl, 14-year-old girl named Priscilla Presley. Sorry, she wasn't Priscilla Presley yet, but he meets this girl named Priscilla, played by Susan Hubley. And the two of them end up becoming an item. And Elvis asks her father, who's a military officer, if he can court her. And the guy's like eventually won over by Elvis. And so Elvis basically forms a romantic relationship with her, and eventually the two of them marry. And then one of the other things that the movie covers is his time in the military, because he was drafted for service, and he went to Germany. And it's interesting seeing him there, because he's talking about how once he gets back from the military, he's wanted to give a shot at acting. That was something that he'd always wanted to do. But he also misses his family, like he misses his mom. And he and his mom were really close, right? And so he gets back from the military, and unfortunately his mom ends up dying shortly after in a hospital, because she'd been showing signs of something being wrong, both mentally and physically. And so Elvis and his dad are with her in the hospital room, and when she dies, and that's something that just devastates Elvis, and it's something that he never recovers from. And so one of the other things that happens is Colonel Tom Parker, the guy who's managing Elvis, basically runs everything in his life. Basically says, okay, these are your friends, and the people who were your friends, they're not your friends anymore. And you can't spend time with your wife because you got to do this and all this stuff. And so this drives a wedge between, him and his wife, because there's this crew of, there's this entourage he has that's unofficially called the Memphis Mafia. And Joe Mantegna, the guy from Criminal Minds, plays, a guy named Joe Esposito, who's kind of like the ringleader of this little Memphis Mafia. And so, I mean, they don't do anything outright malicious, but at the same time, there's kind of like okay, we run the show here, and if we don't want you here, you're gone, that kind of thing. So it takes a toll on, his friendship with other people, such as Red, and it also drives a wedge between, himself and Priscilla. And unfortunately, the two of them get divorced, but not before, the two of them have a kid with one another, and a daughter. And so, I mean, obviously they both, love their daughter, but at the same time, they're kind of like, hey, unfortunately, I mean, it sucks, but us being together, it's not going to work anymore. And so it's definitely something that hurt them both. But at the same time, they both want to try and be good parents for their daughter. But I mean, it's definitely you definitely see how the fame. On one hand, people love Elvis and everything, and they love his music, but they also, like the fans and the press, I mean, they followed him everywhere. And, he liked, interacting with the fans when he was performing, right? But when he's just trying to have a quiet moment, he can't do it, because, there are people waiting outside his house, paparazzi, they, barge into, say, like places where if he and his friends, bought out an arcade or rented out an arcade for a little while just so they could have some fun together, the press barges in and stuff like that. So, Elvis, I mean, it's like he's living in a gilded cage, but, he eventually, I mean, towards the end of the movie, though, I mean, he's fearing for his life, because one of the things that happened was he saw the news about President John F. Kennedy getting assassinated, and considering how popular Elvis is, I mean, he's worried that someone's going to do the same thing to him. So, I mean, he's afraid to, tour, because of this. But eventually, though, he wants to try and get back to his roots, because, I mean, he's tired of, living in this gilded cage lifestyle. Like, he wants to see if he has it in him to perform again. And so then, the movie, at the end, in the final act, it goes back to where the movie started off, which was 1969, and this, first concert, that Elvis, or his first show that Elvis had in 8 years. And so, I mean, he's nervous as all get out, but when he takes the stage, he has to go through his paces a bit, but then, I mean, he shows the crowd that, there's a reason he's called the king. Like, he can still sing, and, he still has good chemistry with the band, and he still knows how to work the crowd. And so, I mean, yes, fame, I mean, on one hand, it did do some damage to his life in some ways, but at the same time, though, there was a reason that he was famous, and there was a reason he was the king. And in the end, he realizes that, I mean, he's still got it. Like, people still love him, so the negative side of fame aside, he finds it all worthwhile. So yeah, I think that overall this was a good movie. I mean, bear in mind this was made in the 70s, and so it definitely comes across as dated in a lot of ways. But with that in mind, though, I mean, I think that the people who put together the movie did a pretty good job. Production wise, I mean, it looked like whenever the movie was, like, say, supposed to be taking place in the 50s or 60s, like the stuff that you see, in the scenery, they did a pretty good job of making it look like it was, within the decade that it was supposed to be taking place in. And Kurt Russell, I thought, did a wonderful job as Elvis. Um, but ironically, he's not the when it comes to the singing parts of the movie, he's not the one who does it. It's a guy named Ronnie McDowell, credited in some circles as the quote unquote voice of Elvis. But when it comes to the speaking scenes, of course, that's all Kurt Russell. Um, like the one downside I could think of is that when he plays Elvis as a teenager and as an adult. And so it's like they tried to make him look younger, like with some makeup and what have you. But then when he's an adult, it's kind of like, well, I mean, he still looks the same, just without makeup, that kind of thing. Um, I think that I don't know. Maybe it was because it was a TV movie. Maybe they didn't have as much in the way of budget or technique to where they could have convincingly made Kurt Russell either age up or age down. But I mean, acting wise, he did good both as a teenager and as an adult. But at the same time, there are moments where it's kind of hard to swallow him as the notion of him being a teenager, and then as an adult. So, but just that's just I think mainly because of like they were limited to what they could do with, say, costuming or makeup. But I almost want to say, if maybe they could have gotten someone to play him as a teenager. But then again, I mean, Kurt Russell, I think, just in terms of acting alone, did a pretty good job of, showing what it was like to be a teenager at that point in time, or what it was like for Elvis to be a teenager at that point in time. Because it's like, when, he's as an actor, I mean, he captures, that angst and, that feeling of uncertainty and, the hopes and dreams that one has as a teenager. And he does a pretty good job with that. So, it's kind of like, visually speaking, it's kind of a mixed blessing, but acting wise, Kurt Russell did a good job. And when he plays Elvis as an adult, I mean, you definitely see him, like, he's a very conflicted individual because on one hand, I mean, he loves to sing, he loves the music, and he wants to bring happiness to the crowd and everything, and that's what makes his day. And of course, I mean, he loves his family, especially his mom, and and you see how it's like one of the reasons he's wanting to be famous is not just because, not for his sake, but he's also wanting to help his family out because they've always lived in poverty. And so there's something very endearing when once he does become famous. I mean, yes, I mean, a lot of that happens after he gets involved with Colonel Parker, but it kind of starts with when he's working with Sam Phillips, right? But when he starts to get famous, though, you see how basically, I mean, his family, his mom and dad, they love him regardless. But when he's actually being recognized and everything, when they're playing his music on the radio, they're so happy for him, and he's happy that they're happy, and he's like, I'm gonna make it. And so when he gets involved with Colonel Parker, that's when the money really starts rolling in, and he's able to buy his mom all this nice stuff and everything. And so there's something endearing about that, because I think a lot of us, if we hit the big time, a lot of us would do something similar. Like you'd be like, hey, we're gonna we want to buy some nice stuff for our family, things like that. So like it comes across as a very humanizing aspect of his character. And there's a nice little moment where that kind of emphasizes just how much he loved playing for his fans, and how much basically they brought him to life when he was on stage. I don't remember what concert it is or where it's supposed to take place, but there's a moment though where of course you have a lot of women, a lot of girls up front swooning and screaming his name and all this stuff, and there's this one little girl who she's trying to get to the stage, but she can't, and it's like she just wants to meet her hero, her idol, or crush, or whatever, but there's just too many people in the way. And Elvis, he just kind of, he sees this, and he kind of just stops the show just for a little bit, and he's like, hey honey, it's okay, and he just makes her feel at ease, and he said, hey, bring her up, it's okay. And so, some of the crew, they just gently bring her up, and he says, hey honey, this is for you. And he has this little sash, and he gives it to her. He said, this is for you, honey, and so is this, and this song's for you. And he starts, singing another number, and so it's a nice little moment, though. It's like, you definitely saw that when he was on stage. I mean, he loved to perform, but he also, loved to, he wanted to, make sure that his fans were having a good time too, and just the fact that he did that for a little girl, that was a really nice moment. And just the way Kurt Russell, played it. I mean, it sounded like, it looked and sounded like something that Elvis would do on stage, Then when you see him, say, being consumed by, I guess, the dark side of fame, you definitely see how he becomes a lot more cynical and jaded about things. And a lot of it, I think, started when his mom died. And I think, the movie makes it very clear that he never really recovered from that. But it's like, on one hand, I mean, he's following the colonel's orders, as well as, those of the Memphis Mafia, because, well, I mean, he's just used to it, that's kind of become his life. But then there are moments, though, where it's like he wants to break out of the routine. He wants to break out of that gilded cage that Colonel Parker and the Memphis Mafia have him in. And he realizes that his relationship with Priscilla is going more and more downhill because of all this. But it's like he can't bring himself to break away from it, even though he wants to some degree. And I remember there was a moment where, his little entourage, is with him, and like mostly consisting of, quote unquote friends. I mean, some of them seem like real friends, some of them just seem kind of like hangers on. But, he's just kind of looking around at them, and he, accuses one of them of saying something like something rude to him, and trying to challenge the guy to a fight almost. And then he basically just fires everyone on the spot, just because, I mean, he can't stand, the fact, he just can't stand the situation, and so, they all leave. But then he has one of his people, he kind of comes to his senses within a few seconds, and he has one of his people, go find them all and say, bring them back, bring them back, bring them back. I'm sorry. And so you in moments like that, though, you can't help but feel sorry for him. And I've heard a little bit here and there about just how controlling, Colonel Parker and also the Memphis Mafia were with Elvis. And so you definitely felt sorry for him in moments like this. But also, Susan Hubley as Priscilla, she did a pretty good job too. You saw her, as a girl who genuinely came to love Elvis and wanted to be a good wife, to him when they were married. But one of the problems was that he was away so often, and he was constantly doing whatever the Colonel or whatever the Memphis Mafia wanted him to do, and it was. And she was seeing him less and less and less. And I remember there was, there's one scene where there's this little gymnasium they have at their mansion in Graceland. And, at one point you see Elvis and his entourage, doing a show or something like that. But then it cuts to Priscilla in the mansion by herself. And she's in the gymnasium just sort of, hitting this punching bag, almost like a robot almost. And the look on her face says it all. It's like, she's also in the gilded cage. And so you definitely, like, I liked her character. I thought Susan Hubley did a good job, but you also felt sorry for her, just because you saw that she wanted to connect with Elvis, and she did to a point, but because of the aforementioned factors, it was like the two of them, even when they were together, they couldn't really be together. And but it was kind of bittersweet when when they had their daughter. And it's like, it sucks that they're divorcing, Like some movies like that weren't biopics, they tried probably to have a happy ending, like they worked stuff out and what have you, but real life doesn't always work out like that. And under those circumstances, the two of them separating was understandable, but at the same time, it's clear that they two do still care about each other. They just realize that, hey, it's not going to work being married anymore. But they still want to be there for their daughter. It's clear that they both love their daughter, and I thought that Susan Hubley did a good job of being someone who was a wife and then eventually a mother too. but yeah, I think another actress who did a good job was let's see, Shelley Winters as Gladys Presley. She plays Elvis's mom, and the way she plays her, I mean, I don't know if Elvis's mom was really like this. Like I said, I don't know a whole lot about the real backstory and what have you, but the way she was played here, though, is someone who, I mean, had been through a lot of tragedy in her life. I mean, both her and her husband were trying to raise a family in poverty, and so there was always stress there, and plus the fact that that she had a stillborn son. I mean, that's something that a mom never really recovers from. And so, I mean, Elvis was basically the apple in her eye. Like, she was always protective of him, and sometimes overly so, but you can't deny that she loved her son. And there are moments that are just, they're so sweet, and they're so heartbreaking too, because it's kind of like, I guess, maybe some of us know someone like that, but then you see how when Elvis starts to become famous, like, she's happy for him, she's genuinely ecstatic, but at the same time she's worried about him because he's constantly going all over the place performing, and when it comes to a point where, like, he literally passes out from exhaustion, I mean, that's one of the many things that kind of causes her to worry even more about him. And so it's a very human portrayal of a mother who had been through some tragedy in her life, and never really stopped seeing their son as a little boy. And I don't mean that in a condescending way, but just that she was a mom, a real mom, and when you see how she starts to have problems, like physical and mental problems, like to a point where she has to be taken to a hospital, I mean, it's heartbreaking. And because this is one of the fixtures in Elvis's life, and he loves his mom, and Shelley Winters, it's like when she's playing this woman who she's just not used to the lifestyle of someone who's famous, even if it's their own son, is uncomfortable with it, not with him, but with the fame and fortune and everything, and it's just, and when her mind starts to break down, that something's wrong. And so when she's taken to a hospital and everything, and you get that heartbreaking scene where Elvis and his dad, they find her unresponsive, in the hospital bed. I mean, it's just devastating. And so, yeah, I mean, Shelley Winters, just did a really good job, playing, the character of Elvis's mom. Someone else I liked was the actor Robert Gray, in his portrayal of Elvis's friend, Red West. So I don't know if Red West was, like, say, a real person, or if it was like an amalgamation of people in Elvis's life. But for the purpose of the movie, though, Robert Gray, did a good job of playing your Red West as someone who was a true friend to Elvis, like going back to when they were teenagers, and who always tried to be there for him, and even when he was starting to be phased out by the Memphis Mafia, he tried to have Elvis's back. And I think eventually, like what the movie shows is that eventually, like the Memphis Mafia tried to phase him out, of Elvis's life, because I guess he wasn't one of them, or he wasn't one of Colonel Tom Parker's chosen, parts of the entourage. But, Elvis, though, like, eventually, you get the idea that, I mean, while he went along with the Colonel's orders, I mean, for a lot of things, he eventually was kind of like, hey, this is one of the few people who's an actual friend of mine, and who's not just with me for the, riches and glories. Like, he stays. And so, so it was cool, seeing, the friendship between the two of them. And when you see, like, Robert Gray, like, in scenes when he's, trying to put his foot down, or when, he's trying to call out Elvis for his behavior, it's like, on one hand, he's pissed off at two parties, Elvis and, of course, the Memphis Mafia. But when he's pissed off at Elvis, though, like, this is like one of the few people, along with, Elvis's wife Priscilla, that try to call him out on, the problems that are happening, And so, I mean, once again, another very human, portrayal, of someone who is a friend, who's, trying to be there, for someone, as a friend, and not just, as a part of an entourage, not just for the, ride to fame and all that. But, yeah, I think, like, overall, I mean, everyone, I think, did good. It's just, I think there are a couple of characters that were sort of underused, at least. For example, you have, let's see, Bing Russell, who played Vernon Presley, and ironically was Kurt Russell's father in real life. But the way he's played in the movie, you kind of get the idea that he's sort of he doesn't wear the pants in the family, so to speak, or maybe he does, but he doesn't have a lot to say. I mean, like, when it comes to, say, like, the family dialogue, the majority of it is with Elvis and his mom, and the dad is just kind of there, like, I mean, he's there in a sense, and he's supportive. It's just, at the same time, he doesn't have a lot to contribute to any of the conversations, or he doesn't have much of an active role in things, and even, say, later on in life, like in Elvis's career, he's just kind of in the background. It seems like he's present, but he's just, in the scenery. So I don't know if that's what Elvis's relationship was with his father was really like in real life, but just the way it was shown in the movie, I mean, he was physically present. I mean, he was there, for his wife and son, but just there didn't seem to be a whole lot of a relationship between him and Elvis. So it would have been interesting to see, like, if that were the case, why that was, but they didn't really go there. Another character who I thought was underused was Colonel Tom Parker, as played by Pat Hingle. And this isn't the fault of the actor, because Pat Hingle is a good actor. Commissioner Gordon from, the Michael Keaton Batman movies. And I remember him as the voice of that ankylosaur in Land Before Time. I think it was Old Rooter or something. He tried to, help Littlefoot after his mom died. But anyway, yeah, Pat Hingle, good actor, rest in peace. But he played Colonel Tom Parker, who incidentally was played by Tom Hanks in the Austin Butler Elvis movie, which I still need to see. But you definitely saw that Colonel Tom Parker is someone who, had a grip on Elvis's life that he didn't want to relinquish. But I mean, he comes across as sort of an affable guy at first, but there comes a point, though, where he's really not present all that much. But it's like his presence is felt to some degree through the presence of the Memphis Mafia, but like a lot of the actions and stuff are carried out by the Memphis Mafia, but you don't actually see the Colonel himself in a lot of scenes, even though his presence was, a constant in Elvis's life after a certain point. So I just wish that we could have seen more of Pat Hingle as the Colonel. It would have been interesting to see Elvis, and the Colonel, try and, like, maybe have some conversations or something, like, about, how much control he has over Elvis's life, because that's brought up a lot, but not with the Colonel. So I just wish that the Colonel had more of a physical presence instead of just like a back mythical background presence or something. But also the character of Joe Mantegna. I'm sorry, the actor Joe Mantegna as sort of the unofficial ringleader of the Memphis Mafia that we see on screen. I mean, it was cool to see him because once again, you got another good actor here. But at the same time, we don't really see how he was brought into the picture. He's just, it goes from one, point in Elvis's life to, oh, suddenly he's got, this Memphis Mafia with him. How did that happen? I mean, we hear a little bit about how Colonel, Parker had, brought the Memphis Mafia in and what have you, but we don't see how that happened. And so when we see Joe Mantegna there, it's like, oh, hey, Joe Mantegna, but how did he get in on things? Or, how does he have so much control, over, Elvis's life? I mean, yeah, we know we know the character is acting on, the Colonel's orders, but we don't know how he was brought in. And we don't exactly know, what the relationship is between him and Elvis, other than, yeah, Memphis Mafia and Entourage, But one other, I will say, sorry, I forgot to mention, I did mention that Charles Cyphers played Sam Phillips, the record executive who kind of, helped Elvis get his start. I did like, his portrayal in the movie, because you saw him as, I mean, yeah, he's a businessman, of course, he's wanting to make money, but at the same time, he comes across as a guy who genuinely has his, talent's well-being, in mind, and to a point where, say, like, he didn't want to let Elvis go, but at the same time, he realized that Elvis's career wouldn't flourish if he didn't have that opportunity that the Colonel provided. And yes, unfortunately, that ended up resulting in Elvis's gilded cage, treatment. But in the grand scheme of things, if Elvis had stuck with Sam Phillips, there's a chance that he probably wouldn't have been as, say, renowned as he is today, unfortunately. But, seeing the way Charles Cyphers played Sam Phillips, though, I mean, it was a believable portrayal because, I mean, yeah, he's a businessman first, but at the same time, he's not without compassion or humanity, or, and like I said, I mean, he genuinely does care about, the well-being of those who are, working, with him, or those who are, aspiring, to be musicians, through his studio and what have you. So that scene when, he basically, gives Elvis his blessing to, hey, go pursue this. I mean, it was nice to see because you saw, that there was a conflict in the sense that he genuinely, cared about Elvis, and he didn't want to, let him go because, I mean, Elvis was kind of like, a hot commodity with him. But at the same time, he cared enough about Elvis to want the guy to have, more if he had, the opportunity for it. So, one thing I'll say is that, like, overall, this is a good movie, but it's, let's see, it's 170 minutes, and there are times where it starts to feel longer than it is, unfortunately. I'm not sure. It's mainly, I guess, pacing issues. Like, there are a couple of scenes that go on a little too long. And I was kind of like, oh, what? I mean, I wasn't checking my watch necessarily, but at the same time, it was starting to feel longer than it was, I think. And also, some of the scene transitions, like when they're going from one time period to another, are kind of abrupt, at least in my opinion. I just, maybe if the transition had been a little smoother, I mean, maybe that could have, negated the feeling of, yeah, this movie's going on a little long, that kind of thing. But, that aside, though, I mean, overall, I thought this was a good movie. I mean, like I said, certain characters I thought could have been utilized more, and the pacing could have been better in some instances, but overall, I thought this was a good movie. So I'm going to go ahead and give Elvis 4 out of 5 stars. This was a good movie. And it does have some special, the DVD has some special features. I haven't checked them out yet, but they are, quote unquote, bringing a legend to life, a featurette with archival interviews of Kurt Russell and John Carpenter from 1979, when this movie was made. Commentary by the quote unquote voice of Elvis, Ronnie McDowell, and Arthur Eddie Hand, or is it Edie Hand? But rare clips from American Bandstand and a photo gallery. And the movie's rated PG, so excuse me. Yeah, that was Elvis, the 1979 TV movie. If you're an Elvis fan, it's definitely worth checking out. If you're a Kurt Russell and John Carpenter fan, it's also worth checking out. So thank you for taking the time to check out my review. You got any questions, comments, please drop a line and let me know. If you like what you see here, feel free to like and subscribe. So thank you very much, Mama. Y'all have a good night. Bye. Or actually, have a good day. It's day. Yeah, because I'm sorry. I'm so used to doing these at night, but here it is. It's still morning. So y'all have a good day. Bye.